The composition feels amateurish, Rachel. Our clients expect more sophisticated visual storytelling, my business partner said, dismissing my portfolio in front of executives from Vogue. The creative directors exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from interested to uncertain. They leaned back in their chairs, reconsidering their initial enthusiasm. My partner, Marcus Sullivan, smiled confidently and opened his tablet with practiced ease. Let me show you the editorial series One Shot for the luxury fashion campaign we completed last month. I sat in the Manhattan conference room on the 42nd floor, watching Marcus present photography work that was unmistakably mine. The dramatic chiaroscuro lighting concepts were mine, developed over months of experimentation. The specific compositional choices that balanced negative space with visual weight were mine. The creative direction that combined editorial sophistication with authentic emotion was mine. Even the post-production aesthetic, the specific color grading and contrast curves that gave the images their distinctive mood, came directly from techniques I'd shared with him during our studio partnership. This was the 23rd time in 2 years that Marcus had stolen my photography work and presented it as his own creative vision to clients, publications, or industry competitions. I'd documented every single instance meticulously, building a comprehensive archive of evidence. I'd gathered irrefutable proof through copyright registrations, original raw files with complete metadata, detailed shooting logs, and witness statements. I'd planned my response with the same precision and attention to detail I brought to manual focus and exposure control in my photography. Because what neither Marcus nor these Vogue executives sitting across the polished conference table knew was that I'd already registered copyrights on all my original photographs with the United States Copyright Office. I'd secured signed contracts with 4 major brands who wanted to work directly with me, not through Sullivan Thompson Studio. I'd been approached by 3 top creative agencies in New York about senior photographer positions with full creative control. I'd also consulted extensively with intellectual property attorneys who confirmed that Marcus had absolutely no legal rights to images I'd created independently, regardless of our business partnership structure. In exactly 48 hours, I would dissolve our studio partnership through formal legal channels and reveal publicly that every single award-winning photograph Marcus had been claiming credit for over the past 2 years was actually my creative work. Every image was protected by registered copyrights and supported by comprehensive raw file documentation that proved authorship beyond any doubt. His studio would lose its entire creative foundation overnight. It would lose its major clients who'd been told Marcus was the photographer. It would lose its industry reputation built entirely on stolen work. Mine would launch with the same images he'd tried to steal, with proper attribution finally restored, and with opportunities he'd deliberately blocked through his systematic exploitation. Before we witness how a talented photographer whose work was stolen for years used copyright law and industry connections to destroy her exploitative partner while launching her own successful studio, I want to thank you for being part of this community. A community that believes creative theft deserves the same serious consequences as any other form of stealing. A community that understands artistic plagiarism should be exposed publicly and punished severely. If you've had your photography stolen by partners or employers, if you've watched colleagues take credit for your images, if you've been the invisible creative force behind someone else's studio success while they collected awards and opportunities that belong to you, this story will resonate deeply. Hit that subscribe button to join thousands of others who appreciate stories where careful documentation and strategic planning overcome exploitation in creative industries. Now let's step into the competitive world of commercial photography where a brilliant artist's work was systematically stolen by her charismatic business partner. Where industry relationships and studio hierarchies enabled ongoing exploitation. Where 2 years of careful preparation and evidence gathering created the foundation for complete professional destruction and creative triumph. My name is Rachel Thompson, and I'm a 33-year-old commercial photographer originally from Portland, Oregon. I grew up in a family where visual arts and creative expression were central to daily life. My mother, Catherine, was a gallery curator specializing in contemporary photography at a respected Portland arts institution. My father, Robert, taught photography and visual theory at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. I was surrounded from earliest childhood by discussions about visual narrative, composition theory, the technical craft of image making, and the intersection of artistic vision with social responsibility. Photography felt like my natural language before I could even articulate why. I learned about exposure and composition when I was 12 years old, using my father's collection of vintage film cameras during weekend photography walks through different Portland neighborhoods. He taught me systematically about the exposure triangle, the fundamental relationship between three variables that controlled every photograph. He explained how aperture controlled depth of field and light quantity, how shutter speed controlled motion blur and light duration, how ISO controlled sensor sensitivity and image noise. He taught me about the responsibility photographers had to capture moments authentically while simultaneously creating compelling visual stories that communicated meaning beyond simple documentation. Those early lessons shaped everything about how I approach photography even today. My father emphasized that technical mastery was absolutely necessary but fundamentally insufficient for creating great photography. He'd show me work by masters like Ansel Adams with his zone system and epic landscape visions, Dorothea Lange with her powerful documentary portraits of Depression-era suffering, Henri Cartier-Bresson with his decisive moments and geometric precision. He'd explain how each photographer combined technical excellence with emotional depth and social consciousness, creating images that transcended mere documentation. He taught me to think carefully about what I was saying with images, not just focusing on how the images looked technically. He'd ask questions during our photography walks that pushed me to consider perspective, framing choices, what to include and exclude, how visual elements created meaning. Why did I choose this angle? What story was this composition telling? How did the lighting affect emotional interpretation? These questions became instinctive over time. I remember one specific project when I was 14 years old that crystallized these lessons. A historic independent bookstore in our neighborhood was closing after 40 years of operation, unable to compete with chain stores and online retailers. My father encouraged me to document not just the physical space with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and worn wooden floors, but the emotional resonance of the closure. The community's sense of loss. The owner's complicated mixture of sadness and relief. The regular customers saying goodbye to a gathering place that had shaped their reading lives. I spent 3 weeks photographing the store during its final month. I captured the owner, Mr. Harrison, standing among half-empty shelves with an expression of quiet resignation. I photographed longtime customers running their hands along familiar spines one last time. I documented the going out of business signs that looked painful against the warm interior that had welcomed readers for decades. I captured the final day when the last books were packed and the lights turned off. The resulting photo essay combined careful composition with genuine emotion. The images told a story about community, commerce, and cultural change. The project won a Regional Young Photographer Award and was exhibited at a local gallery where people from the neighborhood came to see documentation of a place they'd loved. Several visitors told me the photographs captured something essential about the bookstore that would have been lost otherwise. That validation, at 14, taught me photography's power to preserve and communicate experiences. My mother contributed the critical art historical perspective to my photographic education. As a curator specializing in contemporary photography, she possessed encyclopedic knowledge of the medium's evolution across different movements and approaches. She taught me about how photographers throughout history had pushed boundaries, challenged aesthetic conventions, and used the medium to explore social issues. She'd take me to gallery openings and museum exhibitions regularly, discussing afterward what made certain photographs powerful and enduring. She taught me to analyze images critically, to understand artistic choices within historical context, to see connections between different photographers and movements. She'd show me how Robert Frank's The Americans challenged prevailing documentary aesthetics. How Cindy Sherman's self-portraits explored identity and representation. How photographers like Gordon Parks combined artistic excellence with social activism. These lessons taught me that photography existed within broader artistic and cultural conversations. During high school, I worked as an assistant in my mother's gallery, helping with exhibition installations and meeting established photographers whose work was being shown. I absorbed knowledge about the business side of photography that most young photographers never encountered. Gallery representation, pricing strategies, edition sizes for fine art prints. How photographers built sustainable careers and professional reputations. The exposure to professional photographers' work processes and business practices provided invaluable education beyond purely technical skills. I earned a full scholarship to Rhode Island School of Design, one of the most prestigious art schools in the country, where I studied photography with a specific focus on commercial and editorial applications. RISD was intensely demanding, pushing students to develop both exceptional technical craft and sophisticated conceptual thinking. The program maintained extremely high standards, regularly critiquing student work harshly to prepare us for professional realities. I learned from faculty photographers who actively worked for major publications and brands, bringing current professional practices and standards into their teaching. My sophomore year professor, Maria Santos, had been a contributing photographer for National Geographic and Vanity Fair for over 15 years before transitioning to teaching. She brought that elite editorial experience directly into her classroom, pushing us relentlessly to think about visual narrative, immediate impact, and the specific requirements of different commercial contexts. She taught us that professional photography required understanding and satisfying client needs while simultaneously maintaining artistic integrity and personal vision. These weren't contradictory goals but complementary aspects of excellent commercial work. Maria was demanding but generous with students who demonstrated commitment and talent. She'd spend hours reviewing portfolios, providing detailed critiques that identified both strengths and weaknesses. She connected promising students with industry contacts, wrote recommendations that opened doors, and maintained relationships with former students throughout their careers. She became not just a teacher but a mentor whose guidance would prove invaluable years later when I faced exploitation. During junior year, I secured a competitive internship at a prominent commercial photography studio in New York specializing in high-end fashion and lifestyle work. The studio worked regularly with major brands and publications, producing campaigns that appeared in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and on billboards throughout Manhattan. The experience taught me about the business of photography at professional scale, far beyond anything classroom instruction could provide. I learned about managing complex productions involving dozens of people, coordinating with art directors, stylists, hair and makeup artists, set designers, and clients to execute creative visions within strict budget and timeline constraints. Problem-solving technical challenges in real time during shoots when equipment failed or lighting conditions changed. Maintaining creative quality while satisfying commercial requirements and client expectations. One assignment during that internship involved assisting on a major cosmetics campaign shoot for a luxury brand launching a new product line. I watched the lead photographer, Thomas Chen, manage a team of 15 people with calm efficiency. He coordinated seamlessly with the creative agency team who'd developed the campaign concept. He problem-solved technical and artistic challenges as they emerged during the shoot. He balanced creative vision with commercial requirements, delivering images that satisfied both aesthetic standards and marketing objectives. The complexity and professionalism required for high-end commercial photography was absolutely revelatory, showing me what professional excellence actually looked like. My senior thesis project involved creating an extensive photo essay documenting women working in traditionally male-dominated skilled trades. I photographed welders, electricians, construction workers, automotive mechanics, and industrial equipment operators across the Northeast. I created environmental portraits that conveyed both their professional competence and personal stories. The project combined documentary authenticity with sophisticated studio-quality lighting and careful composition. Each portrait required significant preparation. I'd interview subjects beforehand to understand their work and experiences. I'd scout their work environments to find locations that told visual stories. I'd plan lighting setups that would work in industrial settings, often bringing portable equipment to construction sites or workshops. During shoots, I'd work to capture moments that showed both technical skill and human personality. The resulting thesis earned departmental honors and was featured in several photography publications as an example of socially conscious commercial portraiture that elevated documentary subjects. Several images from the series won regional and national student photography awards. The recognition and published work helped me secure a position at a respected commercial studio immediately after graduation, unusual for photographers just starting their careers. After graduation, I joined a well-established boutique studio in Brooklyn that worked primarily for fashion and lifestyle brands. The studio had built strong relationships with creative directors at major companies, producing campaigns for recognizable brands. I spent 5 years there, working my way systematically from photography assistant to associate photographer to lead photographer on major campaigns. The experience taught me comprehensively about the business of commercial photography, about building and maintaining client relationships, about managing productions efficiently, and about delivering work that satisfied both creative ambitions and commercial objectives. My first major independent shoot as lead photographer was a lifestyle campaign for a sustainable clothing brand trying to differentiate themselves in an increasingly crowded market. They wanted photography that felt authentic and documentary in style rather than overly styled and artificially perfect. They wanted images that conveyed their brand values around sustainability, ethical production, and real people rather than unattainable ideals. The creative brief gave me significant freedom to develop a visual approach. I developed a photographic strategy that combined natural lighting, real locations, and genuine unscripted moments rather than heavily art-directed scenes. I cast real people with diverse body types and backgrounds rather than professional models. I photographed them in actual environments where they lived and worked rather than sterile studio settings. The resulting images felt honest and relatable, conveying the brand's authentic values through visual storytelling. The campaign performed exceptionally well across all metrics the client tracked. It drove significant social media engagement, with people sharing images and commenting about how refreshing it was to see realistic representation. It contributed to measurable sales increases during the campaign period. The client attributed much of the success directly to the photography's authentic aesthetic that genuinely resonated with their target demographic. The work won several advertising photography awards that year, though the studio's creative director received primary credit and awards while my contribution was acknowledged only internally within the company. I worked on numerous high-profile campaigns during those 5 years, steadily developing distinctive visual approaches that became signature elements of the studio's portfolio and competitive advantage. There was a beauty campaign that used dramatic chiaroscuro lighting inspired by Baroque painting to create memorable portraits with sculptural quality. A technology brand shoot that successfully combined precise product photography with lifestyle contexts that showed human connection to devices. An automotive campaign that captured vehicles in stunning landscape environments across the American West, creating images that felt like contemporary landscape photography. One project I'm particularly proud of from that period involved photographing a diversity-focused campaign for a major national retailer. The challenge was creating images that authentically celebrated different body types, ages, and ethnicities in ways that felt genuine and respectful rather than tokenistic or performative. The client wanted to demonstrate real commitment to representation, not just superficial gestures. I developed a portrait approach that emphasized individual personality and confident presence while maintaining visual consistency across the entire campaign. I spent significant time with each subject before photographing them, learning about their lives and what made them feel confident and beautiful. I adjusted lighting and posing individually rather than using a one-size-fits-all approach. I encouraged authentic expressions and natural body language rather than rigid poses. The resulting images successfully captured each person's unique presence while creating a cohesive campaign aesthetic. The campaign received widespread praise for its authenticity and artistic quality. It won multiple industry awards and generated significant positive press coverage for the brand. Multiple subjects from the shoot contacted me afterwards saying they'd never felt so beautifully and respectfully photographed in their lives. Several mentioned the experience changed how they saw themselves. The project demonstrated that commercial work could simultaneously achieve business objectives and create positive social impact. By my 4th year at the Brooklyn studio, I'd become known internally and among clients for developing distinctive visual approaches for challenging creative briefs. Creative directors would specifically request me for projects where conventional photography felt inadequate, where brands needed images that would genuinely stand out in oversaturated visual markets. I was proud of these contributions and the creative trust they represented, but increasingly frustrated by working within someone else's studio structure where individual photographer recognition remained limited by company policies. I wanted to pursue my own creative vision more directly. To work with brands and publications without filtering everything through studio hierarchies and approval processes. To build a body of work that was clearly attributed to me personally rather than absorbed into corporate portfolios. To make creative decisions independently without endless committee reviews. I wanted my own photography practice where I controlled artistic direction, client relationships, and business decisions. At 30 years old, I made the decision to start my own commercial photography studio. I had strong technical skills proven across diverse projects. I had a solid track record of successful campaigns that had won awards and delivered results for clients. I had enough industry connections and professional relationships to make independence potentially feasible. What I didn't have was extensive business development capabilities, established direct client relationships independent of studio structures, or the operational infrastructure that professional photography studios needed to compete effectively for major contracts with enterprise clients. I met Marcus Sullivan at a photography industry conference in Los Angeles during a 3-day event focused on commercial photography business practices. He was 40 years old, exceptionally charismatic and seemingly well-connected throughout the industry. He had an MBA from a respected business school and claimed 15 years of experience in creative agency business development and operations. He approached me after my portfolio review session where I'd presented work to a panel of creative directors, saying he'd been specifically looking for a talented photographer partner to build a new studio focused on high-end commercial and editorial work. We met for coffee the following week after I'd returned to New York. Marcus talked enthusiastically and convincingly about his vision for a boutique photography studio that could compete effectively for premium fashion and lifestyle assignments while maintaining uncompromising creative excellence. He said the market currently had strong demand for distinctive photography that genuinely elevated brands beyond generic stock imagery, but most photographers either lacked sophisticated business acumen or worked through large agencies that took significant commissions and limited creative control. Marcus explained extensively how his background in creative agency operations had taught him exactly how major brands made photography procurement decisions. He understood complex approval processes, usage rights negotiations, production budget structures that made studios attractive to enterprise clients with substantial spending. He knew how to position creative services to appeal to creative directors willing to pay premium rates for exceptional photography that delivered measurable results. Over several meetings spanning a few weeks, Marcus outlined in detail how a partnership might work operationally. He'd handle all business development, client acquisition, contract negotiation, and studio operations management. I'd focus entirely on photography, working with clients on creative direction and managing all aspects of image creation. The division seemed absolutely perfect, allowing me to concentrate completely on creative work while someone else handled business aspects I found less engaging and frankly less interesting than photography itself. Marcus had connections to creative directors at major brands across fashion, lifestyle, technology, and consumer goods. He understood the complex business infrastructure of commercial photography. He could handle everything from initial client acquisition through usage rights management and invoicing. He said my photographic talent combined with his business expertise and industry connections would create something unique and competitive. The division of responsibilities seemed genuinely ideal and complementary. We formed Sullivan Thompson Studio as a 50-50 partnership, with both our names appearing equally on all LLC formation documents. Marcus handled initial business development activities while I focused on building our creative portfolio and establishing production capabilities. We secured studio space in Chelsea, a location that Marcus insisted would convey the right professional image to major clients we wanted to attract. The studio space was genuinely impressive. It featured a large main shooting area with professional lighting equipment from Profoto and Broncolor, seamless paper backgrounds in multiple colors, and high-end camera systems including medium-format digital backs. Marcus insisted on premium facilities and top-tier equipment, arguing convincingly that the space needed to convey creative excellence and professional capability to clients accustomed to working with established studios. We installed comfortable client viewing areas where creative directors could monitor shoots. Professional retouching workstations with calibrated monitors and high-performance computers. Production coordination spaces for managing complex shoots. The operational foundation appeared absolutely solid and well-planned. Marcus hired a studio manager and production coordinator, bringing professional organizational structure to operations. He designed our branding and marketing materials himself, creating a sophisticated visual identity. He set up comprehensive business infrastructure including accounting systems, vendor relationships for equipment and services, negotiated favorable lease terms, created detailed project management systems. Everything seemed properly established and professionally managed. The early months were genuinely productive and exciting. I created extensive photography portfolios for different commercial applications we wanted to pursue, showcasing our studio's capabilities across fashion, lifestyle, product, and editorial work. I developed complete projects that demonstrated technical excellence and creative sophistication. Marcus would review images regularly and provide feedback, always expressing enthusiasm about the work I was producing. He'd bring potential clients to the studio to see my creative work, presenting these images as examples of what we could deliver for their brands. I created comprehensive photography projects demonstrating our capabilities across various styles and commercial applications. A fashion editorial series using dramatic studio lighting and bold geometric compositions inspired by 1940s Hollywood portraiture. A lifestyle campaign showing authentic moments with beautiful natural light that felt documentary rather than staged. A product photography portfolio combining technical precision with creative presentation that elevated ordinary objects. An editorial portrait series capturing personality and emotional presence of diverse subjects. I shared everything openly with Marcus during this development phase. I'd walk him through my creative thinking about each project. I'd explain the specific lighting approaches and technical decisions behind each image. Why I chose certain lenses or camera positions. How I'd achieved particular looks through lighting ratios or post-production techniques. I thought we were partners genuinely building a studio together, that my openness about creative processes was normal collaboration between business partners with different expertise areas. Marcus would ask detailed questions during these portfolio reviews, showing what seemed like genuine interest in understanding the photography beyond surface appreciation. He'd inquire about specific lighting setups and how I'd achieved certain effects. About lens choices and why I preferred particular focal lengths for different applications. About post-production workflows and the software tools I used for retouching and color grading. I appreciated his engagement, interpreting it as a business partner intelligently learning enough about photography to effectively represent our studio's capabilities to potential clients. The theft started subtly during early client presentations, so gradually that I initially didn't recognize it as problematic. Marcus would describe images using language that subtly claimed creative credit without technically lying. He'd say, "We shot this campaign," or, "Our visual approach combines," when discussing work I'd created entirely independently. He'd present photographs without clearly stating that I, specifically, had created every single image. The language was ambiguous enough that clients could reasonably assume Marcus had been directly involved in photography rather than purely business operations. At first, I told myself this was probably normal business communication, that using "we" made sense for a studio partnership. But the pattern became increasingly troubling when Marcus started taking client meetings without me present, returning afterward with signed contracts for upcoming shoots where clients apparently believed Marcus himself was the lead photographer who would be creating their images. The first absolutely undeniable instance of theft involved a major fashion campaign for a luxury European brand establishing stronger presence in the American market. The client needed sophisticated editorial-style photography that would work effectively across print advertising, digital media, and social media platforms. They wanted images that felt both polished and genuine, combining high-end fashion aesthetics with authentic emotional resonance. I developed a complete visual concept over several weeks. The approach combined dramatic studio lighting with moments of authentic expression, creating images that felt both carefully crafted and spontaneously genuine. I researched the brand's heritage and aesthetic codes. I developed mood boards and visual references. I created detailed shot lists that would deliver everything the client needed across different media applications. I spent weeks on intensive pre-production work, scouting potential locations that would provide the right visual environments, testing complex lighting setups in the studio to achieve the specific quality I envisioned, working closely with the creative team at the client's agency to develop comprehensive shot lists and detailed visual references, coordinating with stylists, hair and makeup artists, and casting directors to assemble the right team. The actual production involved 3 full days of intensive shooting with professional models, an experienced styling team, hair and makeup artists, and photography assistants managing equipment and lighting. I personally directed every single shot, making all creative decisions in real time. I chose every camera angle and lens. I adjusted lighting continuously throughout each shoot day to achieve exactly the right quality. I directed models to achieve the expressions and poses that would tell the right visual stories. I captured every single image myself. The resulting photographs were genuinely stunning, exactly what the brand needed to make impact in a competitive market. The images combined technical excellence with emotional authenticity in ways that elevated typical fashion photography. Marcus attended the final client presentation with me, positioned as studio principal and business leader. During the presentation, I walked through the creative approach systematically, explaining the visual strategy and showing the final edited images. The client representatives were absolutely thrilled with the work and wanted to proceed immediately with the full campaign rollout. After the presentation ended and we'd said goodbye to the client, I overheard one creative director mention being excited about Marcus's photographic vision and his sophisticated lighting approach. I realized with growing concern that Marcus had deliberately positioned himself as the actual photographer during preliminary conversations and meetings I hadn't been part of. The credit theft had moved beyond ambiguous language to outright misrepresentation. The exploitation escalated systematically from there. Marcus began regularly taking creative meetings without me present, presenting my photography portfolio as examples of his own work. He'd return from these meetings with signed contracts and tell me enthusiastically about shoots he'd booked for us, using images I'd created to win client confidence. He was actively performing photographic expertise he absolutely didn't possess, claiming credit for creative vision and technical skills that were entirely mine. I confronted Marcus directly about claiming credit for my work. He looked genuinely confused by my concern, saying that as equal business partners all studio work was inherently ours, regardless of who had physically created specific images. He said I was being unnecessarily territorial about attribution, that this kind of thinking was counterproductive to building a successful studio. He suggested my concern about individual credit revealed immaturity about how professional creative businesses actually operated. The gaslighting was sophisticated and effective, making me genuinely question whether my perception of the situation was reasonable. That evening, deeply troubled, I called my former RISD professor Maria Santos. I explained the situation in detail, describing Marcus's behavior and his justifications for it. She listened carefully without interrupting, then delivered a clear assessment. She said she'd seen this exact pattern before in photography studios and creative agencies, where business partners or employers systematically exploited talented creatives while claiming their work. She explained that photographs were legally protected by copyright law, that I automatically owned copyright to images one personally created regardless of business partnership structures, and that I should immediately start documenting everything and taking steps to protect my work legally. Following Maria's advice, I began systematically registering copyrights on every photograph I created through the United States Copyright Office. I started keeping detailed shooting logs documenting exactly when and how I created each image. I maintained comprehensive archives of original RAW files with complete embedded metadata showing camera settings, dates, and technical information that proved authorship. I began deliberately building independent relationships with clients separate from Sullivan Thompson Studios' business structure. I was methodically gathering legal evidence while simultaneously planning my eventual exit strategy. During the next 20 months of careful documentation, Marcus's systematic theft continued and actually escalated in scope and boldness. He submitted my photographs to major industry competitions under his own name, winning several awards that should have been mine. He spoke at photography conferences about his creative process, while showing my images as examples. He gave interviews to industry publications about his photographic vision, using my work to illustrate points. He was building his professional reputation entirely on creative work he hadn't created, while I remained invisible to the industry despite doing all actual photography. One particularly egregious instance involved a prestigious editorial assignment for a major fashion magazine. The photo editor had seen images from our portfolio and specifically requested Marcus for a high-profile feature. Marcus accepted the assignment without telling me initially, only mentioning it casually days later. When I questioned why I hadn't been involved from the beginning, he said he'd handle this shoot personally since the client had requested him specifically. On the shoot day, Marcus arrived with me as his assistant. He attempted to direct the photography while I operated the camera and managed lighting. His directions were often technically nonsensical or aesthetically questionable, revealing his complete lack of actual photographic knowledge. I quietly corrected his mistakes and created images that would actually work, essentially photographing the entire assignment myself while Marcus performed the role of photographer for the client and magazine's editorial team. The resulting images were published with photographer credit going entirely to Marcus Sullivan. My contribution wasn't acknowledged anywhere. When the magazine feature won an industry award months later, Marcus accepted it alone, giving a speech about his creative vision without mentioning me. I watched from the audience, documenting everything for my eventual legal case. Another incident involved a major brand campaign where Marcus had convinced the client he'd personally photographed our entire portfolio. During pre-production meetings, the creative director asked Marcus specific technical questions about lighting approaches in previous work. Marcus gave answers that were completely wrong, describing techniques that weren't physically possible. I had to intervene carefully to provide accurate information while trying not to embarrass Marcus in front of the client. The creative director looked confused by the contradiction but didn't pursue it further. I photographed that entire campaign myself as always, delivering exceptional work that satisfied the client completely. Marcus took credit publicly while I remained anonymous. The pattern had become completely unsustainable, both professionally and emotionally. There was an incident with a cosmetics brand campaign that revealed Marcus's complete lack of actual photographic knowledge in ways that should have exposed his fraud. The client wanted close-up beauty photography with extremely precise focus and specific lighting that would highlight product benefits. During our planning meeting, the creative director asked Marcus technical questions about his macro photography approach and ring light techniques. Marcus responded confidently with explanations that made absolutely no sense to anyone who understood photography. He described using f-stops that would create completely wrong depth of field for the application. He suggested lighting ratios that would produce unflattering results. He mentioned using camera equipment combinations that weren't physically compatible. I sat there listening to him confidently describe approaches that would never work, performing expertise he absolutely didn't possess. I had to carefully redirect the conversation, suggesting alternative approaches that would actually achieve the client's objectives. I framed my corrections diplomatically as building on Marcus's ideas, rather than contradicting him directly. The creative director accepted my technical guidance but still seemed to believe Marcus was the actual photographer who would execute the work. The cognitive dissonance was surreal. When I photographed that campaign, I used completely different techniques than Marcus had described, achieving the specific results the client needed. The images were technically excellent and commercially successful. Marcus presented them publicly as examples of his beauty photography expertise. Nobody questioned the contradiction between his incorrect pre-production descriptions and the final professional results. There was also a prestigious editorial assignment for a major men's fashion magazine that Marcus accepted without consulting me. The photo editor had specifically requested him based on seeing images from our portfolio in other publications. Marcus scheduled the shoot and only informed me 3 days before, presenting it as already confirmed. When I asked why he'd accepted an editorial assignment without discussing it with me first, he said he didn't need my permission for studio business decisions. On the shoot day, Marcus arrived dressed in expensive photographer casual clothing, carrying my camera bag as if it was his. He attempted to direct the photography while I operated the equipment. His directions to the model were vague and aesthetically questionable. His suggestions about composition revealed fundamental misunderstanding of visual principles. When he tried to adjust lighting, he moved equipment in ways that would worsen the result. I had to quietly correct everything while maintaining the pretense that he was in charge. The magazine's fashion editor watched this performance with growing confusion. She asked Marcus questions about his photographic influences and creative philosophy. He gave answers that sounded superficially intelligent but contained obvious errors that any knowledgeable photographer would recognize. He mentioned techniques that contradicted the aesthetic of images in our portfolio. He described influences whose work looked nothing like ours. I could see the fashion editor becoming skeptical. I essentially photographed the entire editorial feature myself while Marcus performed the role of photographer for the magazine team. I made all actual creative decisions, managed all technical aspects, directed the model effectively, and created images that would work for publication. Marcus contributed nothing except pretense and obstruction. The absurdity of the situation was almost darkly comedic except for how professionally damaging it was. The resulting editorial was published with photography credit going to Marcus Sullivan exclusively. When the magazine sent the published issue, my name appeared nowhere despite creating every single image. Marcus displayed the magazine prominently in our studio reception area, showing visitors this prestigious editorial as proof of his photographic abilities. The gaslighting had become so extreme that I questioned my own perception of reality. Another particularly painful instance involved a competition for advertising photography organized by a major industry association. Marcus submitted several of my best images to the competition under his name without telling me. The images were from campaigns I'd photographed completely independently, campaigns where I'd developed the creative concepts, managed productions, and created every photograph. Weeks later, Marcus mentioned casually that he'd won a silver award in the competition for one of the images he'd submitted. He showed me the award notification with his name listed as photographer. He was genuinely excited about the recognition, apparently feeling no guilt about stealing credit for work he hadn't created. The psychological compartmentalization required to maintain such dishonesty was remarkable. I congratulated him while internally feeling devastated. That particular image was one I was especially proud of, a portrait that had required significant technical problem-solving and creative vision. I'd spent hours planning the lighting approach. I'd worked extensively with the subject to capture genuine emotion. I'd refined the post-production carefully to achieve exactly the right mood. Marcus had contributed absolutely nothing to its creation yet was receiving industry recognition for my work. The competition awards ceremony was attended by hundreds of photographers and industry professionals. Marcus accepted the award on stage, giving a brief speech about his creative process and thanking various people who'd supported his photography career. I attended the ceremony but wasn't acknowledged. Several photographers I knew congratulated Marcus afterward on his award-winning image. Nobody knew I'd created it. The experience was professionally humiliating and emotionally crushing. There was also an incident where a major luxury brand's creative director specifically requested to meet with the photographer who created specific images from our portfolio. Marcus scheduled the meeting and attended alone, despite the creative director clearly wanting to discuss photography with the person who'd actually created the work. Marcus returned from the meeting saying he'd secured a major campaign contract by really connecting with the creative director about shared aesthetic sensibilities. When I finally met that creative director weeks later during the campaign production, she seemed confused by the contradiction between Marcus's descriptions of his creative process and the actual photographic approaches I was using. She made several comments suggesting Marcus had described techniques and influences that didn't match my actual work. I had to navigate the awkward situation carefully, trying to deliver excellent work while not explicitly exposing Marcus's fraud to the client. The creative director eventually pulled me aside privately and asked directly whether I'd actually created the portfolio images that had led to hiring our studio. I hesitated, torn between honesty and not destroying our client relationship. I said carefully that I created all photography for Sullivan Thompson Studio. She nodded slowly, clearly understanding what I wasn't saying explicitly. She didn't pursue it further, but I could see her reassessing her perception of Marcus and our studio partnership. Each incident of theft felt like a small professional death. Every time Marcus claimed credit for my work, a piece of my identity as a photographer was being stolen. Every award he accepted, every interview he gave, every presentation where he showed my images as examples of his creative vision, was another instance of erasure. I was becoming invisible in my own career despite creating all the actual work. During those 20 months of documentation, I was simultaneously building my exit strategy carefully and systematically. I registered copyrights on over 200 photographs, creating a comprehensive legal record of my authorship. I maintained meticulous records of every shoot, every client interaction, every instance where Marcus claimed credit. I gathered testimony from photography assistants, stylists, and other crew members who could verify that I'd created all the studio's work. The documentation process became almost obsessive in its thoroughness. I created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every photograph I'd created since forming Sullivan Thompson Studio. For each image, I recorded the creation date, client project, camera settings from EXIF data, lighting setup descriptions, crew members present who could verify my authorship, and evidence of Marcus claiming credit. The spreadsheet eventually contained over 300 entries, a comprehensive record of systematic theft. I backed up all original RAW files in multiple locations, knowing these files would prove authorship definitively. RAW files contain embedded metadata including camera serial numbers, exact timestamps, and technical settings that create a digital fingerprint impossible to fabricate. I maintained these files on encrypted external hard drives, cloud storage services, and a dedicated backup server. If Marcus ever claimed he'd created images, the raw files would prove otherwise irrefutably. I also started printing and physically dating my most important images, creating tangible evidence with timestamps. I'd print images on archival paper and have them notarized with the date, creating legal documentation that photographs existed at specific times. This physical evidence complemented digital records, providing additional proof layers that would withstand any legal challenge. I carefully documented Marcus's public claims about my work. When he gave interviews to industry publications, I saved the articles where he described his creative process. When he spoke at conferences showing my images, I obtained recordings or detailed notes from attendees. When he submitted images to competitions, I kept copies of submission forms showing his name as photographer. Every instance of misattribution was documented and archived. The emotional toll of continuing to work while documenting exploitation was significant. Every day I walked into the studio knowing Marcus would likely steal credit for whatever I created. Every client meeting where he performed photographic expertise felt like watching identity theft in real time. Every award announcement that listed his name for my work created fresh anger and frustration that I had to suppress while maintaining professional composure. There were moments when I wanted to expose Marcus immediately, to publicly confront him about the theft, to tell clients directly that he'd been lying about creating our portfolio. But I knew emotional reactions would be less effective than careful systematic preparation. I needed irrefutable legal evidence, financial security for the transition, and industry relationships that would transfer to my independent practice. Premature confrontation would give Marcus time to prepare defenses or muddy the evidence. I started attending therapy to process the psychological impact of ongoing exploitation. My therapist helped me understand that gaslighting was a deliberate manipulation tactic, not evidence that my perceptions were wrong. She helped me maintain clarity about what was happening while managing the emotional stress of the situation. The therapeutic support was essential for maintaining stability while executing my long-term exit plan. I also began quietly building direct relationships with clients, carefully establishing rapport with creative directors who hired Sullivan Thompson Studio. I'd suggest coffee meetings to discuss upcoming projects, positioning these as normal creative collaboration while actually building personal connections that could transfer when I left. I'd share my personal contact information, establishing communication channels independent of studio infrastructure. Several creative directors told me privately during these conversations that they'd specifically requested working with me rather than Marcus. They said they valued my creative vision and attention to detail. They appreciated how I understood their brand needs and translated them into compelling visual narratives. These conversations confirmed that clients recognized my actual contributions despite Marcus's credit theft, that my work had value independent of Sullivan Thompson Studios' brand. I consulted extensively with intellectual property attorneys who specialized in copyright law and creative industry disputes. The initial consultation was revelatory. The attorney explained that copyright ownership in photographs was remarkably straightforward under U.S. law. The photographer who actually creates an image owns the copyright automatically upon creation. Business partnerships don't change this fundamental principle unless there's a specific written work for hire agreement transferring ownership. I brought our partnership agreement to review. The attorney examined it carefully and confirmed it contained absolutely no language transferring copyright ownership from individual photographers to the business entity. Every photograph I'd created remained my copyrighted work legally, regardless of being created within the partnership structure. Marcus had no legal claim whatsoever to images I'd personally created. The attorney advised me on exactly how to document everything properly for potential legal proceedings. Maintain comprehensive raw file archives with metadata intact. Register copyrights systematically through the U.S. Copyright Office, which creates public record and enables statutory damages in infringement cases. Gather witness testimony from crew members who'd observed my work. Document all instances of Marcus's misattribution systematically. Build an overwhelming evidence case that would withstand any legal challenge. I also approached several major brands directly about future work, carefully testing whether they'd be interested in working with me independently once I left Sullivan Thompson Studio. I framed these conversations diplomatically, explaining I was considering launching an independent practice and wanted to understand potential client interest. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Multiple brands said they'd been working with Sullivan Thompson specifically because of my photography and would transfer their business to my independent studio. I secured preliminary agreements with 4 major clients who committed to transferring their photography needs to my new studio when I was ready to launch. These weren't just verbal promises but actual signed letters of intent specifying project volumes and approximate budget commitments. These agreements gave me financial security for the transition, ensuring I'd have immediate revenue when leaving Sullivan Thompson Studio rather than starting from zero. 3 top creative agencies in New York also approached me during this period about senior photographer positions on their creative teams. Industry contacts I'd cultivated were clearly aware of my actual work despite Marcus's systematic credit theft. They knew who was really creating Sullivan Thompson Studios' award-winning images, and they wanted that talent on their teams. These opportunities validated that I could succeed independently and didn't need Marcus's supposed business expertise or industry connections at all. I also began preparing the operational infrastructure for my independent studio. I researched commercial space options in Manhattan with good access and professional facilities. I investigated equipment leasing and purchase options. I consulted with accountants about business entity structures and tax implications. I developed comprehensive business plans and financial projections. I wanted everything ready so I could launch Thompson Photography immediately upon leaving, not lose months to set up logistics. The preparation also included building a website and brand identity for Thompson Photography. I worked with a designer friend to create professional branding that would position my independent practice as sophisticated and capable. I prepared portfolio presentations showcasing my work with proper attribution. I drafted contracts and service agreements. I established banking and business infrastructure. Everything was ready and waiting for the right moment to activate. After exactly 20 months of systematic documentation and careful preparation, I had everything needed to leave safely and successfully. Copyright registrations covering my entire body of work created at Sullivan Thompson Studio. Comprehensive documentation of Marcus's theft spanning dozens of documented instances. Client commitments providing immediate revenue security. Professional infrastructure ready to activate immediately. Legal counsel prepared to defend against any claims Marcus might make. The foundation was absolutely solid. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus to formally dissolve our partnership. I chose a Tuesday morning, deliberately selecting a time when I knew we'd have privacy in the studio. I arrived at 8 o'clock, an hour before our regular staff would arrive. I'd brought my attorney, Jennifer Chen, who specialized in intellectual property and creative industry disputes. Her presence would immediately signal this wasn't a normal business discussion. I also brought Daniel Morrison, a photographer colleague who'd agreed to serve as an independent witness to the conversation. I wanted third-party documentation of everything that would be said. I'd learned that Marcus was skilled at reframing conversations and denying statements after the fact. Having witnesses eliminated that possibility. Marcus arrived at 8:15, seeming surprised to see 3 people waiting in the conference room. He looked at Jennifer and Daniel with confusion, then at me with growing concern. "Rachel, what's going on? Why do you have lawyers and witnesses here?" His voice carried an edge of anxiety that I'd never heard before. I gestured for him to sit down. "Marcus, I'm here to formally dissolve our business partnership effective immediately. I'm also here to inform you that I'll be pursuing legal action regarding your systematic theft of intellectual property and fraudulent misrepresentation of authorship." His face went through several expressions rapidly. Surprise, confusion, then defensive anger. "What are you talking about? This is insane. We're partners. We built this studio together." I opened the folder I'd prepared and slid it across the table. This dossier contains documentation of 23 specific instances where you claimed authorship of photographs I created. It includes copyright registrations showing me as the sole creator of every image in Sullivan Thompson Studios' portfolio. It contains witness testimony from photography assistants, stylists, and crew members confirming I created all our studio's work. It documents competition submissions, publication credits, and presentations where you fraudulently claimed my work as yours. Marcus opened the folder and began flipping through pages. I watched his expression change as he realized the comprehensiveness of the documentation. Page after page of evidence. Copyright certificates, email records, witness statements, competition submission forms showing his name on my images, publication credits that should have been mine. This is ridiculous, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We're business partners. All studio work is collective. This is just you being territorial about individual credit. Jennifer leaned forward. Mr. Sullivan, I'm Jennifer Chen, Ms. Thompson's attorney. I need to correct several significant misunderstandings you appear to have about copyright law. Under United States copyright law, the photographer who creates an image automatically owns the copyright upon creation. Your partnership agreement contains no work for hire language that would transfer copyright ownership to the business entity. Every photograph Ms. Thompson personally created remains her copyrighted intellectual property. Marcus looked at Jennifer, then back at me. Rachel, this is crazy. You can't just walk away from our partnership. We have contracts. We have obligations to clients. I've consulted with 4 of our major clients, I said calmly. They've agreed to transfer their business to my new studio, Thompson Photography. They were working with Sullivan Thompson specifically because of my photography. They've confirmed in writing they want to continue working with me independently. His face flushed red. You've been going behind my back? Stealing my clients? That's completely unethical. Your clients? I kept my voice even. Marcus, you don't create any photography. You've never created any photography for this studio. Every single image in our portfolio was created by me. The clients aren't yours. They hired us for photography I created. I built the business infrastructure, Marcus argued. I brought in the clients. I negotiated the contracts. I created the systems that allowed you to focus on photography. This studio wouldn't exist without my contributions. Your contributions don't include creating a single photograph, I said. And they especially don't include fraudulently claiming authorship of my work. Page 47 of the dossier documents your interview with Professional Photographer magazine where you described your creative process and your photographic vision, while showing exclusively my images as examples. Marcus flipped to that page, his hand trembling slightly. I watched him read his own quoted words about creative techniques he'd supposedly developed. His face showed recognition that this evidence was damning. You submitted my work to the American Photography Competition under your name, I continued. You accepted a silver award for an image I created. You gave an acceptance speech about your creative journey. That's not ambiguous business communication. That's deliberate fraud. I can explain all of this, Marcus said, but he was clearly struggling to formulate the explanation. The way I presented things might have been unclear, but I never intended. You intended exactly what happened, I interrupted. You systematically positioned yourself as the creative force behind our studio while I actually created all the work. You built your professional reputation on photographs you didn't create. That's intellectual property theft. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Fine. You want to leave? Leave. But you're not taking my client relationships. You're not taking my studio infrastructure. And you sure as hell aren't taking equipment I purchased. Jennifer pulled out another document. This is an inventory of all equipment Ms. Thompson is removing from the studio. It includes only items she personally purchased or that were purchased specifically for her use. The complete purchase records are documented. She's leaving all equipment purchased by the partnership. And regarding client relationships, Jennifer continued, clients have the absolute freedom to work with whichever photographer they choose. There's no enforceable non-compete agreement. Any attempt to interfere with Ms. Thompson's independent client relationships would constitute tortious interference with business relations. Marcus sat back down heavily, looking defeated. Rachel, please, let's talk about this reasonably. We can restructure the partnership. I'll give you more prominent credit going forward. We can change the business name to Rachel Thompson Photography with me handling operations. I'll adjust our revenue split. Whatever you want. I don't want a restructured partnership, I said. I want my work properly attributed to me. I want the career I've earned through my actual creative work, not filtered through someone who steals credit. I've already registered Thompson Photography as an independent business. I'm leaving today. You'll fail without me, Marcus said, anger creeping back into his voice. You think you can handle business development? Client relationships? Contract negotiations? You're a photographer, not a businessperson. I've been handling client relationships very successfully while you took credit, I replied. The creative directors I've worked with know exactly who created the photography they value. They're transferring to Thompson Photography specifically to continue working with me. Marcus's expression shifted to something uglier. I'll sue you for breach of partnership agreement. For stealing proprietary client relationships. For damages to the business. Jennifer didn't seem concerned. Any legal action you pursue will result in public exposure of your systematic copyright infringement and fraudulent misrepresentation. The evidence Ms. Thompson has gathered is comprehensive and irrefutable. She has witness testimony from multiple photography assistants and crew members. She has raw files with metadata proving authorship. She has copyright registrations predating your false claims. Additionally, Jennifer continued, we're prepared to countersue for substantial damages based on your systematic misappropriation of Ms. Thompson's copyrighted works. Copyright infringement carries statutory damages up to $150,000 per willful infringement. We've documented 23 separate instances. That potential liability is significant. Marcus's face had gone pale. He was clearly beginning to understand the legal exposure his fraud had created. The bluster and anger were draining away, replaced by visible fear about consequences. What do you want? He asked quietly. What do I need to do to make this go away? I want you to sign the partnership dissolution agreement, I said. I want you to acknowledge in writing that I created all photography in Sullivan Thompson Studios' portfolio. I want you to agree not to claim credit for any of my work going forward. And I want you to contact publications and competitions where you claimed my work and issue corrections. If you comply with these requirements, Jennifer added, Ms. Thompson is willing to forego pursuing financial damages for your past infringement. But any future misrepresentation will result in immediate legal action. Marcus read through the dissolution agreement Jennifer provided. His hand shook slightly as he turned pages. The agreement was clear and comprehensive, leaving no ambiguity about authorship or future obligations. He picked up the pen Jennifer offered, hesitated for a long moment, then signed. I watched him sign his name on the document that ended our partnership and acknowledged the truth he'd been hiding for 2 years. The signature looked shaky, lacking his usual confident flourish. Daniel Morrison, serving as our witness, signed as well, documenting that Marcus had agreed to these terms voluntarily. I need to gather my equipment, I said, standing up. I'll be removing my cameras, lenses, lighting equipment, and computer systems today. I'm leaving all partnership-purchased equipment and the studio infrastructure. Marcus didn't respond. He sat staring at the signed dissolution agreement, probably beginning to process that his studio had just lost its entire creative foundation. Without my photography, Sullivan Thompson Studio had nothing to offer clients. The beautiful Chelsea space, the expensive equipment, the operational infrastructure, all became worthless without creative talent to sustain it. I spent the next 3 hours systematically packing my personal equipment. My camera bodies and lenses. My portable lighting gear. My computer workstations and backup drives containing all my raw files and archived work. Photography assistants who'd worked with us helped me load equipment into a rental truck, several commenting privately that they'd known I created all our studio's work and were glad I was finally getting proper credit. By noon, I'd removed everything that belonged to me from Sullivan Thompson Studio. I took one last look at the space we'd built together, the beautiful shooting area where I'd created so much work that Marcus had stolen. Then I walked out, closing that chapter of my career permanently. The industry response to my departure was swift and decisive. Clients I'd worked with understood immediately what had actually been happening at Sullivan Thompson Studio. Creative directors who'd valued my work transferred their business to Thompson Photography without hesitation. The 4 major brands with signed letters of intent became my first major clients, providing immediate substantial revenue. Marcus's reputation collapsed almost overnight once the truth emerged publicly. Industry colleagues who'd admired his award-winning work learned he'd systematically stolen credit from his female business partner. Publications that had featured him issued corrections. Competition organizers who'd given him awards privately communicated embarrassment about being deceived. Sullivan Thompson Studio lost clients rapidly as word spread about the fraud. Several photography assistants and stylists who'd worked at Sullivan Thompson Studio publicly confirmed my account, describing how they'd watched Marcus take credit for work I'd created. Their testimony eliminated any ambiguity about what had occurred. The creative community response was harsh and unforgiving toward Marcus. Credit theft is considered one of the most serious ethical violations in creative industries. Within 6 months, Sullivan Thompson Studio closed permanently. Marcus attempted to rebrand and continue independently, but no credible creative director would work with him after the exposure of his systematic fraud. His professional photography career was completely finished. The beautiful Chelsea studio space was sublet to another business. The expensive equipment was sold. The infrastructure he'd built became worthless without creative talent to sustain it. Meanwhile, Thompson Photography flourished immediately and dramatically. I completed major campaigns for the brands that had committed to working with me. I won photography awards with proper attribution finally restored, my name appearing on work I'd actually created. I spoke at industry events about both creative photography and the critical importance of protecting photographers' intellectual property rights. The recognition I deserved finally arrived. I began extensive advocacy work helping other photographers protect their creative work from exploitation. I developed educational resources about copyright registration, documentation practices, and recognizing warning signs of credit theft. I spoke at photography schools and conferences about my experience, teaching emerging photographers about protecting themselves legally and professionally. I mentored young photographers facing similar exploitation, sharing strategies that had worked for me. The advocacy work became as meaningful as the photography itself. I heard from countless photographers who'd experienced similar exploitation, who'd had their work stolen by partners, employers, or clients. Many felt powerless against more established figures in the industry. My story demonstrated that careful documentation and proper legal protection could overcome power imbalances, that creative theft could be defeated through systematic preparation. I created online resources explaining copyright law specifically for photographers, breaking down complex legal concepts into practical actionable guidance. I partnered with intellectual property attorneys to offer educational workshops about protecting creative work. I worked with photography organizations to develop best practices and standard contract language that protected photographers' rights more effectively. 10 years after leaving Sullivan Thompson Studio, I published a comprehensive book on photography copyright law that became an industry standard reference. The book combined legal information with practical case studies, including my own experience as a central example. It taught photographers how to register copyrights properly, document their work systematically, recognize exploitation, and respond effectively. Law schools teaching intellectual property began assigning it in courses on creative industries copyright. Marcus's systematic fraud became a widely known cautionary tale taught to photography students and discussed in industry circles. His name became synonymous with creative theft and exploitation. The severity of his professional destruction served as a warning to others who might consider similar behavior. The creative community took credit theft seriously, understanding it as genuine theft that deserved serious consequences. 15 years after dissolving our partnership, I received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society of Media Photographers recognizing both my photographic excellence and my advocacy for proper attribution and copyright protection. The recognition validated that transforming personal exploitation into broader advocacy benefiting the entire photography community created positive outcomes far beyond individual success. During my acceptance speech, I spoke about the importance of documentation, the power of copyright law to protect creative workers, and the necessity of industry accountability for credit theft. I encouraged photographers facing exploitation to document everything systematically, consult with attorneys early, and understand they had legal rights regardless of power imbalances. The standing ovation suggested the message resonated deeply with an audience of professional photographers who understood these challenges. Today, Thompson Photography operates as one of the most respected commercial photography studios in New York, working regularly with major brands across multiple industries. My work has been featured in every significant publication. I've photographed campaigns that have won numerous awards with my name properly attached. I've built exactly the career I envisioned when I first decided to pursue photography independently, creating work I'm proud of while maintaining complete creative control. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome is the systemic change my advocacy helped create. Photography organizations now emphasize copyright education more strongly. Industry publications regularly cover credit theft issues. Contracts have evolved to protect photographers better. Young photographers entering the field today have better resources and awareness about protecting their work than I did when I started. That's the ultimate outcome when systematic exploitation meets someone talented enough to succeed independently, patient enough to document everything carefully, and committed enough to transform personal justice into broader advocacy that benefits others facing similar challenges. Marcus Sullivan destroyed his career through his own theft and dishonesty. I built mine on the foundation of work I actually created, protected by laws designed specifically to defend creative workers from exactly the exploitation I experienced.